Thank you, Eric, and good evening to everybody. Can I see a show of hands of the people in here who are citizens of the city of Rancho Mirage? Thank you. I wanted to start tonight because my presentation has this long title, and that's good, but it's really about three things: vision, purpose, and meaning. And the building you're sitting in is an example of clear vision and civic vision, because this is a small community. It's not Los Angeles. I think probably the residents are very happy about that. This library, someone had a vision for this library that it would be more than just the library for Rancho Mirage, that it would be a library for, as it turns out, the entire region, and a cultural gathering place. And so that vision, that civic vision, is important because people often have concerns that their government isn't doing something useful for them. And so I just always want to point out that when civic entities have a vision, they follow through on it, and then they operate it in the public interest, you who are the citizens of Rancho Mirage should take ownership of that, and you should be proud of it because you've done something that helps people all across this region. And then 6 years ago, your same civic leaders here had a vision for an observatory, a public observatory, something there wasn't in the entire valley. And again, that's the kind of thing where you say, well, I don't have to build an observatory, I just think it would be a good idea. And I think it would be useful, and it would be a way of lifting up the spirits of our residents, and indeed the residents of the entire region. They had that vision, and the purpose of it is very clear. It happens all the time. And the meaning of it is, as the meaning of both of our institutions are, is that you help people to lift their view, and you help them to engage with science in a way that isn't frightening, and to see the importance of science and of discovery and of inspiration. And so I wanted to start that way tonight because, as Eric said, we share that. We're sister institutions, both operated by cities, both about public observing. Obviously, the library does many other things, but the intellectual inquiry and the desire to know more and to understand and to educate is the same. And so I want to start with vision, because vision is an interesting thing, and in times of immediacy like we live in, vision is sometimes a hard thing to come by. And so I think it's important to sometimes look back at history and understand, how did vision get implemented? How did someone have a vision, and how did it come to be? This was the vision that our architects had painted when we did the renovation of the observatory in 2002. It is, at best, a fanciful representation of what Griffith Park and the observatory might look like, with splashes of color that, quite honestly, are impossible. But it's lovely, and I love it, and so it goes to the idea that people have visions about things, and they can't always be fully realized. This gentleman, Griffith J. Griffith, was one of those kinds of people who had visions of things. Some of them were good, and some of them were quite awful. And it is that complexity that I think is part of the story of what has happened as a result of his vision. He came from Wales. He was an immigrant. He was born in 1850. He came to the United States essentially penniless, made his way to the West Coast, became a reporter for a San Francisco newspaper, and one of his beats was mining. And he learned a lot about mining and ended up making a lot of money in mining, a lot of money. And then he got into Los Angeles real estate and made even more money, and ended up owning the entire Rancho Los Feliz. And this is a section of Los Angeles. You see the Los Angeles River going up like that. And so this is a 4,000 acres of land in the middle of Los Angeles. Well, except for the part where it's not in the middle of Los Angeles of 1896. And in 1896, Griffith, who had by that time started calling himself Colonel Griffith, decided that he wanted to give the vast majority of his rancho to the city of Los Angeles. He had traveled in Europe, and he had seen the great cities of Europe. And he believed Los Angeles, which he moved to in 1882 and considered his hometown, he believed that Los Angeles was going to be a great city. He had a vision for Los Angeles of it being a major center on the entire West Coast. Mind you, at this time, San Francisco is 4 times larger in population. So Los Angeles is not a major city yet. But he sees it coming. And so this is his rancho, all along here in what we now know as the Hollywood Hills, and he decided he was going to give it to the city as a Christmas present in December 1896. And the city said, well, that's a lovely concept, and we really appreciate your generosity, but this area is 2 miles outside the city limits. So Los Angeles is, well, my pointer can't do it, but it's southeast of there is where the central part of Los Angeles was. And so they were worried about the kinds of things that people do worry about, implementing things like roads and infrastructure and maintenance. And fortunately, their vision was overtaken by the American desire to own property. In this case, the city owning property. And so the city accepted his gift, and they named it Griffith Park. And this is another view of what it looked like. This is actually Mount Hollywood, and this is where I work every day. But you see that there's not much there. And this is the deed that the city council approved to accept the gift. And you see what Griffith said: it must be made a place of recreation and rest for the masses, a resort for the rank and file, for the plain people. That is the way people spoke in 1896, I guess. I consider it my obligation to make Los Angeles a happier, cleaner, and finer city. I wish to pay my debt of duty in this way to the community in which I have prospered. So he gave the gift to the city, and this is what Los Angeles looked like. That is, again, Mount Hollywood, what is now known as Mount Hollywood. And this is Western Avenue and Sunset, which is the boundary of the park. So all of this is Griffith Park, except for the part where, as you can see, there's not much there, and the city sort of had just taken on an entire satellite of itself, and it eventually grew up to Griffith Park. And so this is what Los Angeles was like. This building right here, that's pretty much the exact location of the theater where the Academy Awards were held just the other day at Hollywood and Highland. So Los Angeles was not a big city. Griffith had a vision for the city. And this is what City Hall used to look like then. Obviously now you know the City Hall. And so that's a vision that Griffith had of a place and the importance of that place. He had an idea that it was going to be bigger. And in the subsequent years, he argued with the city about its development of it, and he drank a lot. He was a very arrogant man, and unfortunately, one of his darker visions was that he was incredibly jealous, and I also mentioned the drinking. And a few years after he gave the gift, he shot his wife. And that is unforgivable, even in that time where there was not an equality between men and women. He was put into prison as a result, although it was only a 2-year term. She survived. She got what is sort of notionally referred to as the fastest divorce in California history. And she lived on for years after he passed away. So this was a darker vision of his. He came out of prison saying that he had been reformed and had actually written manifestos about prison reform while he was in prison. In 1908, he went to the 60-inch telescope at Mount Wilson, which was at the time the largest telescope in the world. Mount Wilson is an observatory that was built in the high mountains above Los Angeles. It's at 5,000 feet. It was the beginning of the revolution of mountaintop telescopes, started in California. It is very much between Lick Observatory in the Bay Area, Mount Wilson, and then Palomar down by San Diego. For 70 years, California had the largest telescope in the world. And California was the engine of discovery, the creation of the modern universe. Griffith went to this because he was a wealthy man, and he got invited by the astronomers to come up and look through the 60-inch telescope. And he looked at things through the 60-inch telescope and was quoted as saying, "Man's sense of values ought to be revised. If all mankind could look through this telescope, it would revolutionize the world." And that put him on a path to developing a public observatory. And the reason for a public observatory is this is a research observatory, and so research needs to take place. This is the road that they used to take the telescope up to Mount Wilson. It got better over time, but the idea of people trucking up to Mount Wilson, bothering the astronomers, and also actually making up there was not realistic. Griffith wanted them to have an opportunity to observe on their own, because he believed that there was a transformative experience that would occur if someone put their eyeball to a telescope, just as he had had his transformative experience. So he proposed the idea of a public observatory. Well, he, unfortunately, was still quite notorious, and justifiably so, and the city wanted nothing to do with him. And so he got to the end of his life, and he left money in his bequest for a public observatory. He also left money for the Greek Theater. If anybody has ever seen a concert at the Greek Theater, very famous performance venue just down the hill from us. In his bequest, he specified the 4 principal components of the Griffith Observatory that we know today. A theater of the heavens, which later became a planetarium, public telescopes, obviously, a hilltop location, and exhibits about science. That was 1919 when he passed away, and the components having been defined, when the will was adjudicated late in the 20s, planetarium technology had been invented by the Zeiss Corporation, and the court was willing to allow the substitution of a planetarium for the science theater, or the theater of the heavens, on the principle that that would have been exactly what Griffith would have wanted. So you had then the makings of Griffith Observatory, which was built between 1933 and 1935. And the premise of the bequest was that it would be built with the funds from the bequest, and then it would be given to the city of Los Angeles, and the city would operate it in perpetuity for free. And that is what has happened. That's what happened for 67 years. Then, as Eric referenced, we needed to do some renovation and expansion. And again, this is where you come to the issue of vision, is that someone had a vision. The current director of Griffith Observatory started his job as director in 1974. He has been director for 46 years. In 1978, he started Friends of the Observatory with Colonel Griffith's grandson and his wife, because he knew that he was going to need help getting the observatory renovated. That effort to do that then went through a master plan, voter approval of funding, architectural design. The building didn't close until 2002. So you can see 24 years from vision to reality, and then 4 years, almost 5, to get the building actually renovated. Everything was restored. The historic structure was restored and entirely preserved, including all of the sight lines. The planetarium was completely reimagined. That's the old skeleton of the plaster dome. And then an addition was made underneath the front lawn so that we would double the size of the building without having any change to the visual appearance of the building. So we could basically serve the number of people we were serving, but have a better visitor experience. So that's how that vision got played out. Now, this is our 85th anniversary. We are, as Eric said, operated by the City of Los Angeles Department of Recreation and Parks. You can see, and film companies love the fact that the building looks, in this view, exactly as it did in 1935. Although all the pictures from 1935 are black and white, the building actually did have color at that time, and it looked exactly like this. So we're often standing in for a time period that was 85 years ago. We do get 1.6 million visitors a year. We've had about 85 million visitors since we opened in 1935. We get an audience that looks like the city of Los Angeles in its diversity because we're free. And we're open very late every night. We're open till 10 every night except Monday, and on Monday we're closed so we can fix things. And people come through the doors, and they look like Los Angeles, and they sound like Los Angeles. It is the People's Observatory. And they also, so it's one of the most diverse audiences of any facility like this, certainly in the United States. We also get all of the people who come to Los Angeles to visit, because Los Angeles has seen a giant upsurge in tourism, and we have become something of an icon for the city of Los Angeles. We are the most visited public observatory in the world, and that would seem like a bold claim, except there aren't very many. And so we know what they are, and we clearly have more people visited, because the fact is most places weren't set up to do that. That's one of the reasons why I'm so fond of your observatory, because that's exactly what it was set up to do from the very beginning. It's exactly what we were set up to do. We've done very tiny little bits of research over the last 85 years, but nothing significant. So the question then is, okay, you have these visions, then what do you do with it? And the observatory and the park do a number of things. For reference, this is the Los Angeles area, and that's Griffith Park. Then this is Griffith Park sort of blown up, and there's the observatory down there on an outcropping of Mount Hollywood. Colonel Griffith wanted it to be on top of Mount Hollywood. For those of you who've been to the observatory, you know that our parking is challenging in the best of circumstances, and certainly not of the kind that you would want on top of a hill, an even bigger hill, and a steeper and sharper hill. This is the observatory. This is Griffith Park. All of this, and on the backside, you see we've got 3 golf courses, we've got the zoo, we've got the Autry, the Travel Town Train Museum, the old merry-go-round that was part of the inspiration for Walt Disney, for Disneyland. So the park serves about 10 million people a year. The park has the Hollywood sign. The observatory is the best place to see the Hollywood sign. The neighborhoods around the Hollywood sign are glad we're the best place to see the Hollywood sign. As I mentioned, we also have the Greek Theater, and here we are, and then here's our neighbor, the Greek Theater, down below. This is the best piece of public observatory real estate in the world. You can't ask for a better location, with the obvious exception of the light pollution, which is substantial, but our instruments were designed to withstand it. Obviously, our premise as a public observatory is the visitor as observer and the building as instrument. And that is a thread line through all of our programs. And I'm going to go through each of the elements that Colonel Griffith said had to be in the observatory. The first one was location, and we've talked about that. The next one was a telescope. This is our Zeiss 12-inch telescope. It is a refracting telescope. That means that it isn't super big, but it can see very bright things like planets, moons, some nebulae, very, very clearly. It also has very, very easy eye relief. So you can step up to it. You actually do step up to it on these stairs. You see people they put their eyeball to the eyepiece. That's what we want them to do. We want them to have that visceral experience of making their own observations. Eric mentioned I worked at NASA. I worked in the science division. I got to see Hubble images before they were published to the papers. And there was one in the early days, particularly of Saturn, that was quite stunning. It was a much better view of Saturn than anything that we'd seen before. But there was something, it was much smaller when I looked at it through our telescope, but it was more impactful because I was doing it myself. It was my observation. We also have a solar telescope, and I might just mention, this is the most looked-through telescope in the world, on the planet. This is more people have seen the face of the sun on our solar telescope than any telescope in the world. And we actually have a triple beam solar telescope. One beam comes through this hole in the ceiling onto a spectrograph, another one over here on an H-alpha filter, and then this is a live image of the sun. And that is a reflection on frosted glass. That is not a video. And we thought about in the exhibit program changing it so that it wasn't square because videos, it looks like a video, and so sometimes people don't pay attention to it. We do have telescopes on the lawn every night. In addition to the Zeiss telescope, we put about 350 people through the Zeiss every night, and another couple, probably 600 or 700 on the portables on the lawn. We have star parties. We have observing parties for major events like this one. So telescopes are we have a monthly star party with the Los Angeles Astronomical Society and the LA Sidewalk Astronomers, where we have about 24 telescopes on the lawn. So, and we even have coin telescopes that let people look at Los Angeles. Because again, it was all about observing. That's what Griffith wanted people to do. We also have a planetarium, the Samuel Ocean Planetarium. We use the Zeiss Starball to preserve the night sky. It is the finest set of stars that you can see inside a building. You can go outside in Joshua Tree and see more, but not many. This is a fabulous instrument. We preserve the stars. Apollo astronauts actually trained in our planetarium for celestial navigation in case their computers went out and they needed to guide the spacecraft while they were flying back from the moon. We use our technology, like the star projector or our video projectors, to tell stories about the sky. They're not narratives of a visit or a tour or the latest findings. They are stories, and they have a beginning, a middle, an end, and as the director is fond of saying, a point. And the only way that you can effectively tell stories, in our opinion, is with a person. So every one of our shows is live. We do 8 a day on weekdays, 10 a day on weekends, every one of them performed by a live person who speaks to the show. This was our show Time's Up, about the Maya calendar, Earth ending, natural catastrophes, flying monkeys, and so on and so forth. Naturally, because we needed to do that to dispel. The exhibit program relies on bright colors, bold imagery, bold objects, and a sensibility about observing. And so these are our Ballon murals. You don't see things like this in public buildings anymore, and it's too bad. This is the story of the sky told through mythology, and each one of these panels that are just all exquisitely painted are the story of the sciences. And so it's a wonderful juxtaposition. Each of the galleries, and we have 4, are devoted to a different aspect of human observation and the progress of human observation. This is the Hall of the Eye, which is about how human observation has evolved from the eye to the telescope to mountaintop observatories to space. And we even have a Tesla coil in that gallery, which, to be honest with you, has nothing to do with astronomy, but is so cool, and we'd had it for 83 years, so we didn't decide we wanted to get rid of it. The Hall of the Sky is about the objects that we see in the sky and how they influence us, principally the moon, the sun, and the earth and their interactions, which, if you think about it, if you were asked why there were seasons, it would be hard to answer that question just standing on the earth. You need to understand the dynamics, so we built overhead models to help people see exactly how it worked. On the edge of space, we have our meteorite collection. That's called Pieces of the Sky. This is actually a cosmic ray chamber. And you can see cosmic rays that are constantly going through all of us right now, but you can see them and they leave little trails along the supercooled alcohol in that device. And then you have inside, and we're underground at this point, you have telescopes to look at this, the largest astronomical image in the world. And we wanted that image because it's impressive, and we wanted people to be able to actually observe it inside using telescopes and binoculars. And then we have a seismograph downstairs as well, and a number of exhibits, and we have Einstein, and he's sitting there and he's doing this. which is an odd position to put the greatest scientist of our age in, but it has a meaning. And the meaning is, if you go out to the night sky and you hold your finger up like this to the sky, right near Orion, the amount of sky that is covered by your finger is what is equivalent to that 150-foot wall. And so it's blown up as if your eyes were 36-inch telescopes. And people can walk up to it and touch it. We have instruments outside. This is a sundial. It's been in use since 1935. People are always amazed that it can tell the time. This is a solar system model embedded in the concrete. It is scaled accurately to the dimensions. So you have all 4 of the inner planets here, and then you start walking out to the sidewalk to get to your car, and you come across Jupiter and Saturn, and then you come across the one that probably once a month I'll be walking in, and I will see, and I might mention it's always adults, who go past the next planet, look down, step back, look again, and snicker. And it's Uranus. And you can do with that what you wish. These are the embedded lines, sunset and moonset lines on our west terrace. They face to the western horizon. They do what the Indians used to do, which is watch where the sun sets on the horizon, and if you do that, it will tell you what time of year it is. And so we do ceremonies at the spring, at the solstices and equinoxes, and hundreds of people come out and the media come out. And again, people are always surprised that the sun will actually set directly on the line, almost as if we knew it was going to happen. And in fact, that is the joy of astronomy, is that you do know things are going to happen. When Eric shows people things in the planet, in the dome, he knows exactly what it's going to look like and exactly where it's going to be and how to point the telescope, because astronomy is a science. This is our transit corridor. This was the one architectural flourish we allowed the architects to have, and to build us a new instrument. And this line is the Griffith Transit line. And this stairway railing, this was their thought, is actually at the angle that if you look up it from the bottom, it points at the North Star. But our transit corridor is actually an instrument where the sun passes over each day, and it only works once a day. So in our on-demand culture, this is kind of a strange thing. But it's a real instrument, and people get to do, and we do a talk every day at the instrument showing how the spot of the sun will come up onto the arc, and it will cross at exactly the day that it is. And again, people are always amazed that it could possibly do that, and that it will actually carry that light up onto the chart, which is on the wall adjacent, and it will show them where in the pathway the sun is in the sky and what constellation it would be in if you could just suddenly shut it off. And so those are, again, we're trying to give people instruments so they can be observers on their own. The building is also now a thing of sort of distinctive architecture, and so people like that. That's part of the purpose the building serves, is that we restored it to the way that it was. And it has some lovely sight lines that were entirely the credit of Austin and Ashley, the original architects back in 1933. And we have published a magazine since 1937 that focuses on observation. So you have all of those things, and we do those things, and we've done those things every day for 85 years, and people like them. At least we think people like them, because we do get 1.6 million visitors, and that's increased every year since we reopened after renovation. This is indulgent, so forgive me, but it is our TripAdvisor rating. And of the 678 things to do in LA, we are second, only to the Getty Center. If you've been to the Getty Center, it is one of the most fabulous places on the planet, in my opinion. It also cost $1 billion, and it has a $1 billion endowment. We are a city facility, and we were not built for $1 billion or any fraction thereof. But people like it, and they feel like it's theirs. And that is part of something that's meaningful. We also show up on lists because we've been around a long time. One of my favorites is this one, which is it's the most romantic place in the state. For California, it was us. I'm not sure I entirely understand that. Breathtaking views, most filmed locations, 10 best places for engagement photos. I liked this one a lot, where we beat out the Hollywood sign. Not that it's competition in any respect, but that was nice because that's nice recognition by people that this is a place, and Los Angeles preserved it, and the city gets high marks for doing that and always having that. But the problem is if you pay attention to your lists and you put too much stock in them, then things like this will happen, and there'll be a backlash, because that is the way our culture works now. So now it isn't just the observatory you have to come to, you can go other places, which of course I completely agree with. It has come to the point where we somewhat represent Los Angeles, and so people develop products that we get no benefit from other than they're charming, and I bought 5 of them for gifts, so I guess the company did really well off of me. And if you have a Chase account, you probably saw an image sort of like this on one of the ads that they send you, or your statement or something like that, because they've used that. And we have become sort of a symbol of Los Angeles. Even coffee companies decide of their own accord that they will just use our image, and that will somehow be something that's good. And being popular means people will come and see us. Ray Bradbury came early on, which was just absolutely fabulous. The First Lady and her children came with her mother, and they had a great visit. Brad Pitt was there very recently. We hosted the Division of Planetary Sciences meeting, which was a very nice honor, because that's obviously a group of folks who study the kinds of things that we look at every night. We hosted the Stanley Cup. When the Ducks won the Stanley Cup, they wanted to bring it for a photo session to the observatory, including looking through the telescope and sitting out in front of the monument, and then this picture, which we posed with our staff. So we're very fortunate in that. We've been in a lot of movies. We really deserve some sort of a star on the boulevard. We should have been a named co-star in Rebel Without a Cause. It's the observatory being the observatory in 1955. So they're in the planetarium, they're walking through the exhibits, they're sitting outside, they're looking through the telescopes. They're doing everything the observatory does. They're also fighting with knives in our southeast loading area, which we do not allow any longer. This is the Terminator. You recognize the building in the background. Fortunately, you do not recognize any of the specifics of former Governor Schwarzenegger, because he is not wearing any specifics. This is Dragnet, and my favorite line, as you see the observatories, they're here, and at one point they're sitting in a car up in Griffith Park, and his girlfriend says, "Oh, Joe, look at the stars. There must be dozens of them." So, sometimes we have work to do after we get represented. La La Land was a huge step for us, and we became part of the La La Land tour. Some of the most beautiful shots that I've ever seen of the observatory were the sequence inside the building where they danced into the room, into the central rotunda with the murals. It was just so lovely and charming. The scene in the planetarium was not filmed inside our planetarium. We wouldn't let them, because we don't allow any filming in there, and also they wanted to fly, and we couldn't obviously permit that. So they built a recreation, and they even rented a real planetarium projector from the International Planetarium Projector Museum, which, as I'm sure you all know, is located right next door in Big Bear. So you should go visit. We also showed up on The Simpsons, and it's all sort of evocative. It's not referenced. Dancing with the Stars opened their 23rd season by dancing on our lawn. It's actually a lovely piece. If you go home and Google Griffith Observatory Dancing with the Stars, it's about 3 minutes long. It's very nice. I have a particular affinity for the Big Bang Theory, because they're about science in a sort of tangential way to the bawdy humor. But they were representations of science, and that is part of what our being in films and other kinds of representations like this, it puts a consciousness that, wow, science is something that people care enough and like enough that they would buy a mug with a picture of a science facility on it. So that means something. It didn't hurt any that Raj, his character actually in the latter seasons worked as a lecturer at Griffith Observatory Planetarium in the show. We also got to participate with our show Light of the Valkyries in the Ring Cycle, which was a giant LA civic activity, and we got to participate by having a planetarium show about the Northern Lights, which are part of what Wagner was referencing in one of the pieces, in the most famous piece from the Ring Cycle. And we get to do programming that, this is kind of a new thing where science programming is viewed as kind of a hip happening thing to do, nerdy fun. But people are willing to own that, and I think that's fantastic. And these are fantastic programs. Many of them are live streamed, and I commend them to you. But our mission is, so that's all great, and representation for science is really important, but our mission is inspiring everyone to observe, ponder, and understand the sky. The sky is very accessible, and so if people know what's going to happen, it makes them more interested. And so we will publish things like this when there are conjunctions of planets to give people an idea. You can just go outside and look. You don't need a telescope. You don't need our help other than to know, what am I looking at? Because people know they're looking at something. They just don't know what it is, but they want to know what it is. And that's the gateway that astronomy offers that many other sciences have to struggle with. We sometimes, because we have talented people on staff, imagine what things will look like when we can figure out how to see them. And this was our astronomical artist in 1979 drew this imagined what would Pluto look like. And when New Horizons went by and took this picture, you can see that he was pretty much on spot, which is kind of remarkable unless you understand how the outer solar system works. We also had an event for Pluto, and Pluto was downgraded from a planet right before we opened, and we had an exhibit, and we had it in the cement, and people asked us why everything is ruined, and we said, no, it doesn't matter what it is. It's interesting, it's significant, people care about it, and so it's in. We don't call it a planet because we're an astronomical institution, we have to be right, but we didn't get rid of it. We also get to celebrate other scientific achievements and other exploration and astronomical striving. And so Cassini and Buzz Aldrin and Apollo, and we had 11 days of celebrations for Apollo, the 50th anniversaries. And we do a presentation for every single one of the Apollo missions. And one of the presentations we do at every one of those celebrations is Apollo, hoax or no hoax. And for those of you who lived through it, that would seem almost demeaning, but you have to keep in mind that we're now more than 2 generations beyond living through that experience. And without that visceral connection to that moment and that time and that effort and initiative, you have surveys that show upwards of 25 to 30% of the American public believing that it did not happen. And it just did. And we can prove it, and that lecture is all about doing that. And that's what we have to do sometimes, is we have to use our credibility to help people. Eric does this all the time here. People come in and they look at the sky, and then they get a notion about something, and they share it with him, and he has to gently move them back to accuracy. And you do have to be gentle. You don't want people to be wrong. We did an entire series of events, including a concluding one on the evening of December 21st, 2012, which is when the Earth was supposed to end according to the Maya calendar, except that's not really what the Maya calendar said. But we took it as an opportunity. We did a planetarium show about it, and what does it tell you about time and the flow of time, and that it was not the end of the world, and that's the director, Dr. Krupp. We had a gong and the whole thing. Showmanship plays a role. We had a goodly-sized audience on the lawn, people who came out. It was very cold, and in Los Angeles, cold will trump almost anything. And our curator had to go on Good Morning America because a designer, Isaac Misray, said something about the moon that was completely wrong. And he kind of doubled down on it. And so they came to the observatory to film our curators saying, no, it's not exactly that way. And that's what you do, because it's important that things be accurate so that people have confidence in science. And that's, again, the meaning of a place like ours, and a meaning of a place like this, is that the media can come and they can get answers from people who know. This is our exhibit downstairs about the planets. This has meaning too. Each of the planets is sized accurately to each other. So you can get a sense that Earth is a lot smaller than Jupiter. Jupiter is sized accurately to the Leonard Nimoy Event Horizon Theater, which is a circle here, which is the diameter of the sun. Our architects did that, and all credit to them and our exhibit designers for coming up with that relational quality. And our guides do a talk about this so that people can get a visceral sense of, a relatable sense of how big are things, because they look at things in the sky and they're just dots. And the value of looking through a telescope is that they become worlds. So an object is turned into a world. We do have a formal education school program, and about 25,000 kids come every year, and it's a 2.5-hour very intensive program. They get programs in both theaters, and they look through the cellular telescope, and they have exhibit talks, all relating to the 5th grade curriculum. And it's a wonderful program, and I can say that because I did not develop it. We have special programs for kids. We had one year in the Greek Theater where we had 4,000 kids come and hear a performance of a concert about music from each of the ages since Galileo made his discovery with the telescope, including a special composition that was written and narrated by Leonard Nimoy. And that was just that was a lovely, lovely activity that, we can't do that very often, but we could. We have shared experiences where people come to observe. Sometimes they're observing terrestrial things, and we got 2 flybys by the shuttle because we're Griffith Observatory. And it was the only day since I've worked there in my 22 years that I actually thought there were too many people on the hill, and you're only seeing some of them. Here's the rest, and all up on the trails. And it was just a lovely, as someone who worked for NASA right after the shuttle exploded, it was really nice to see that happen, sort of as a capper. We also do observing for the partial solar eclipse. Sometimes with things like that, you don't need to look through a telescope. You just need to have a solarama or eclipse glasses. You can make an observation yourself. And there is a power to that. And there's a power to doing it together. And that's what this is. These people came to see a lunar eclipse in December 2010, except for the little problem that the sky literally opened up and deposited, a year's worth of rain that very night. So but except the lunar eclipse was still happening. It just wasn't happening to be able to be seen in Los Angeles. And so hundreds of people came inside, not just to be warm and dry, but they sat there and they watched the eclipse happen on the screen. And they did the same thing when Mars landed in 2012. And just hundreds and hundreds of people, and here on the mezzanine that overlooks the downstairs, and you can't even see the screen, which is over here. And there were people standing on the trash can that's right there, and I had to ask them to get down. And then I asked them, this is on television at home. Why didn't you just watch it there? And they said, we just wanted to be here. And so places where people can go and have those shared experiences, and there are fewer and fewer of them all the time, that's a valuable thing. And if they turn around and they're looking around and they see other things and they have a greater experience, then we all win. And when we can't look at it directly ourselves, or when we can look at it but a lot of other people can't, like people on the East Coast, we have taken in the last few years to sort of setting ourselves up as a live streamer. So we use our telescope to live stream eclipses and other major events like the close approach of Mars, and NASA very often picks up our stream and runs it as theirs. because they're not a telescope agency, they're a space agency. But they want to share, and they have the infrastructure to share with a lot of people. This particular one, I believe, was shared with millions of people. Our stream was, and again, people are observing. It is on a screen, but it is a real observation. We did the same thing when Mars came close last year. We got Buzz Aldrin to come, and he was live on our program, and Tuvok from Star Trek Voyager was there, and we live streamed that so people could see, what does it look like through the telescope. Again, a real observation. But in the end, what it comes down to, if you're talking about the power of public observing and the meaning of public observing, is just the act and the quality of looking up and reconnecting with the sky. We don't have to. We have smartwatches, we have televisions, we have things that will tell us what the weather is, what the season is, we have calendars. We have all the modern conveniences that allow us to be completely disconnected from the sky. Totally different from our ancestors who completely relied on the sky to tell them if they were going to die, or when they should plant, or when the buffalo were going to come by. And it's hard for us to relate to that now because it's so set apart. And part of the idea of places like your observatory, our observatory, is getting people just for a moment to stop, to put down their phone, to ponder, to look up at the sky. Lunar eclipses are great. You can watch them entirely with your naked eye. They'll look just as great if you're doing it that way. You can also look through a telescope. It does have the transformative experience that Griffith imagined. And it's hard to explain, just like it's hard to explain to people why it's so great to see a solar eclipse in person. I was the person who never went to solar eclipses until the last one, the national one. And after all those years of hearing people talk about it and saying, well, how great could it possibly be? It's so great. It's emotional. And I can't describe it using words, even though I can talk a lot. You can look at, you can get people interested in the great images from the great telescopes, like the Hubble Space Telescope, the wonders of space, and it makes you contemplative. Public observing does, about the big questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What is our place in the universe? When you look up at the stars, you have thoughts like that. And the idea of places like the observatory here in Rancho Mirage, the observatory in Los Angeles, other public observatories in the world, or telescope clubs that help people see the sky, is to help people translate that moment of inspiration into something a little bit more, to help them along. And that's why I'm so pleased to be here at our sister institution sharing that story with you tonight. So thank you.